When I was a little kid, my family and I lived in a minute rural village in the south of England. From a child's point of view, it was amazing. Everyone knew each other, and me and all my friends could spend hours discovering every nook and cranny which lay undiscovered by the town's general lack of youth. Sure, we had school and other blots that we had to suck up, but every child has to deal with that. However, not every child has to deal with a social outcast that had an obsessive fascination with me and my friends, which at the time I was completely unaware of how perilous this could be. I was just a naive kid, and the man was benevolent and always polite to us. Although when my mum heard of his antics, as she called them, she was mortified. She never revealed the reason of her distaste of the man, and so I continued to see the man and speak to him. Every morning, he would walk through the same forest where me and my friends spent countless amazing hours, and it seemed as though he would compete with us for time there. Not in a bad way, but it was almost as if he lived in the forest part-time, and only retreated to his house at night time to reduce the risk of being plagued by the wildlife, which would be harmless to us kids, but carried some strange grudge against the man, just like the rest of the village. Our developing brains couldn't add these two factors together. We could hardly add much, honestly. All the minor concussions sustained from jumping off of trees and logs must have been instrumental in that. It didn't faze the man, however, who always insisted on us calling him Mr. Acute. He always commemorated us and our ability to say his name, even though after a few tries, it became much less of a feat. Nevertheless, he showered us with non-stop compliments, which of course made us feel good, as we just assumed he was this ideal second father figure to us kids. He would always ramble with these entrancing stories about him and his late wife, who unfortunately passed away. He put the same effort talking about her as he did talking about us, and I knew he held her in high regard, and was maybe just feeling lonely, that he found some solace in us kids who were more innocent and could put a smile on his face. Eventually, however, my parents started to get suspicious of the man, in a way any good parent would be, in a bid to protect their precious child. They always insisted one of them had eyes on the man when he spoke to us, just in case one day was the day he decided to reveal his true colours. But alas, weeks went by, and he never let his supposed facade slip. He was as nice and pleasant as ever, always completely invested in our lives, probably more than his. I must admit, I always questioned why our townspeople decided to bear this grudge against Mr. Acute. To me, it seemed like a complete waste of energy, and if they got on, maybe they could discover that this man was actually an asset to our society. I kept questioning this for a while, and eventually I was faced with the reality behind the man, which began to answer my queries. One day, I was completely wiped out after a heavy day of school, coupled with an amazing adventure through the forest with my friends, and I was so ready to just unwind and relax at home. As a result of this, I passed the man's house without saying hello, and stopping to speak to him, which broke the routine we had put in place subconsciously. As I passed, he was sitting outside of his porch, and I could see out of the corner of my eye, his expression changed from a warm, friendly smile to a demonic, completely enraged stare. He gritted his teeth like an angry dog, and stormed out of his chair and went inside, making no effort to do the entire process quietly or with any grace. This caught me off guard, as I didn't ever envisage this kind of scenario happening. But anyway, I moved on, and didn't replay it too much in my mind. I guess I just naturally assumed that everyone had a breaking point. The next day, I was again walking home from school, exhausted and ready for bed, when I was stopped dead in my tracks. I looked up and saw Mr. Acute right in front of me, looking down and smiling. He explained how he wanted to apologise for his actions yesterday, and that he wanted to make it up to me, to show that he wasn't actually like the stereotype that people had described him as. I suppose I felt bad, as I understood that he was probably very lonely, and just wanted someone to talk to since his wife's passing, so I obliged. He detailed how he'd made some cake in his house and wanted me to join him. And I'll admit, I was skeptical, because if my mum found out, she'd never let me socialise with new people ever again. But I agreed, as his charisma overshadowed the potential issues, although it was a decision I'd lived to regret. We entered his house, and it was dilapidated, creaky, and had a strange atmosphere, the complete opposite of what he himself gave off. Regardless, I figured that maybe he just didn't value the aesthetics as much. I was mainly just focused on the cake he promised me. We arrived at his table, which mirrored the same appearance as his house, forgotten and needing improvement, and then he suddenly sprung on me that we had an extra guest. I was puzzled as there was no one else around from what I saw. However, he quickly arrived back with a chair, which he turned around to reveal the skeleton of his wife, which had been maintained and revamped to make it look like she was alive again. I screamed out of pure fear and reflex, and got up from the table and ran. All my time out in the woods meant I could easily outpace Mr. Acuve, who was now portraying the evil that everyone had universally agreed that he had. My parents must have heard the commotion, as they were waiting for me by the door. My dad called the police and assisted them with the investigation by giving vital information about his unhealthy obsession with speaking to the kids in the neighbourhood. As I suspected, he claimed he was lonely, and everyone else had ostracised him from our rural group. But despite this heartfelt sub-story, there was no way he could defend the murder of his own wife. She was an obstruction according to him, and so he invited her for cake one time as they tried to make up after an argument, but it was laced with cyanide, and it killed her. My family had suspected all along that he had murdered his wife, but kept the fact away from me, as he didn't want to scare me and weren't entirely sure. There was even a fake funeral to cover it up, where the coffin was filled with trees and logs to weigh it down, and make it seem as though his wife was actually in there, to gain back some sympathy from the crowd. All I can say is that I'm glad I made it out of there alive. But in all honesty, I'm wondering why I was his target. I made him happy in any regard, and he always made time for me. Was it purely just because I ignored him that one day? Maybe there's no way to really unpick and delve into the mind of a complete and utter psychopath.